The water was colder than expected, even for that depth. It pressed against the exposed skin at the neck seals and wrists, a slow, creeping chill that no wetsuit ever truly stopped. The divers had descended following coordinates pulled from a decades-old naval map, a forgotten wreck resting far from shipping lanes, far from curiosity. In 1997, sonar was good, but not perfect, and what lay below had been categorized as nothing more than collapsed steel and scattered rock formations. That was enough to justify the dive. Nothing more. The seabed emerged gradually from the darkness, revealed in fragments by narrow cones of artificial light. Rusted metal ribs of the ship jutted upward like the remains of some long-dead animal, its skeleton picked clean by time and pressure. Sediment floated lazily in the water, disturbed by the slow movement of fins. Everything about the scene felt still, suspended, as if the ocean itself were holding its breath. They moved carefully, methodical, trained to notice details without imagination interfering. That discipline is what kept divers alive. Fear came later, after the facts were processed. At least that was how it was supposed to work. Near the starboard side of the wreck, half buried in silt, lay what appeared to be a large rock formation, rounded, dark, its surface uneven but smooth in places, like stone worn down by centuries of current. One diver's light passed over it briefly, registered it as part of the terrain, and moved on. But the second diver slowed. There was something wrong with it. Not wrong in a way that triggered alarms or panic. Wrong in a way that felt subtle, almost polite. The shape didn't quite match the surrounding geology. It wasn't jagged like broken reef or layered like sedimentary stone. It looked deliberate, too cohesive, too singular. The diver hovered, adjusting buoyancy, and aimed the light again. This time, the beam lingered. The rock expanded. At first, the mind searched for rational explanations. A trick of light, a cloud of silt shifting, pressure changes in the water, but then it contracted, slowly, rhythmically. The movement was unmistakable, subtle but consistent, like the rise and fall of a massive chest. The diver froze. In that instant, training collapsed into instinct. The body reacted before thought could form. Heart rate spiked, breathing accelerated, and the regulator hissed louder than it should have. The sound felt obscene in the silence, like shouting in a cathedral. The rock breathed again, a slow intake, a slower release. The realization settled in with terrifying clarity. Whatever lay beside them was not part of the wreck. It was not stone. It was alive, and it was enormous. The diver signaled frantically, flashing the light in tight, erratic patterns toward their partner. The second diver turned, annoyed at first, then confused, then very still. Both beams converged on the shape now, illuminating more of its surface. What they saw did not resemble any known marine animal. The texture was neither scaled nor smooth. It looked leathery, thick, scarred, as if this thing had survived centuries of pressure and darkness. Faint ridges ran along its surface, expanding and collapsing with each breath. The edges of its body disappeared into the seabed, suggesting a size far greater than what was visible. Neither diver moved. Down there, movement meant sound, sound meant attention, and attention was the last thing either of them wanted. Time stretched unnaturally. Seconds felt like minutes as they hovered beside something that should not exist, their lights betraying their presence with every flicker. The creature did not react. It did not turn. It did not flee. It simply continued breathing, slow and deep, as if utterly unconcerned by the fragile intruders floating inches from its body. Halfway through that unbearable stillness, a thought crept into the mind of one diver, uninvited and chilling in its simplicity. How long had it been there? The shipwreck was old, older than modern records. If this thing had settled beside it, or beneath it, that meant it had watched the ship sink, watched men drown, watched decades pass in silence, and now it was being watched. If you're listening to this right now, take a moment and tell me in the comments, from where in the world are you watching this descent into the unknown? The creature's breathing pattern shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but both divers noticed it instantly. The rhythm changed, becoming slightly faster, the expansion deeper, the contraction more deliberate. A response, not random, not environmental, awareness. The lights trembled as hands shook inside thick gloves. Training screamed at them to retreat slowly, to avoid sudden movements, to keep visual contact. But instinct urged flight. Every nerve demanded distance. They began to back away, finning carefully, inch by inch. The wreck loomed behind them now, offering no shelter, no safety. The rock filled more of their peripheral vision than before, not because it moved, but because they were finally understanding its scale. What they had mistaken for seabed was only a fraction of its body. The rest vanished into darkness below, coiled or folded in a way that defied anatomy. Then the breathing stopped. Complete stillness. In the deep ocean, stillness is never neutral. It is a decision. If this story is already tightening something in your chest, this is the moment to subscribe to the channel. Not for comfort, but because what waits below only gets darker, and you won't want to surface alone. One diver's light flickered, then steadied. In that brief dip of illumination, something shifted along the creature's surface. A line appeared where none had been before. A seam. Slowly, it opened. Not eyes, not a mouth. Something else. A structure unfamiliar, organic, ancient. The interior absorbed light instead of reflecting it. A darkness deeper than the surrounding water. The diver closest to it felt an overwhelming pressure in the head, not physical, but psychological, like being observed from the inside out. They didn't wait anymore. Both divers turned and kicked hard toward the ascent line, discipline shattered, survival overriding protocol. Bubbles erupted violently, spiraling upward, a trail of sound and movement impossible to miss. Behind them, the wreck faded back into darkness, but neither dared to look back long enough to confirm whether the thing had moved. They reached the safety line and began a controlled ascent that felt anything but controlled. Decompression rules were followed only because fear sharpened focus. Mistakes at that depth were fatal, and neither wanted to die carrying a truth no one else would ever hear. On the surface, hours later, neither spoke at first. The boat rocked gently, indifferent to what had happened below. Eventually, one diver broke the silence with a single sentence. Voice hollow. That wasn't supposed to be there. The official report would later describe an unidentified biological formation, possible deep-sea organism, no threat observed, no further investigation recommended. The coordinates were quietly removed from public databases, and somewhere beneath the wreck, in the dark pressure of the deep, something ancient resumed its slow, patient breathing. If this first descent pulled you in, make sure you're subscribed, because we're only at the beginning. They didn't talk about it for weeks. The ocean had a way of swallowing memories, just like it swallowed ships. When the dive team returned to port, the report was filed, the footage archived, and the incident wrapped in silence. But silence doesn't erase things. It preserves them, like fossils in stone. By mid-1997, the diving company had moved on to other projects. Pipeline inspections, recovery operations, oil survey contracts. The two divers were separated, assigned to different vessels. One of them, still haunted by what he saw, quit within a month. He told his supervisor that the sea was alive in ways we don't understand. No one pressed him for details. Divers quit all the time. Pressure, nerves, accidents. It was just part of the job. But the other diver didn't quit. He stayed, drawn by something he couldn't name. He told himself it was curiosity, professionalism, pride, anything but the truth. That he needed to know if it was still there. He requested assignment back to the same region, citing equipment recovery as the reason. His superiors approved the request without question. The ocean floor there was remote, unregulated, cheap, forgotten. The second expedition left in late September, during a period of calm seas and low wind. The vessel carried a reduced crew, mostly technicians and surveyors. No one besides the diver knew what truly awaited below. He'd reviewed the footage from the first dive hundreds of times, frame by frame. The moment the rock moved was visible only for half a second, but that was enough. He knew where to look. As the ship approached the coordinates, he stood at the stern, watching the water. The sea looked normal. Too normal. Flat. Glossy. Deceptive. Beneath that still surface stretched miles of cold, crushing dark, untouched for centuries. He felt a pulse beneath his feet, not from the engines, but from somewhere deeper, almost imperceptible. When they reached the site, sonar readings returned something unexpected. The wreck was still visible. Same coordinates, same depth, but a new formation had appeared nearby. Roughly the same shape, roughly the same size. It wasn't on any geological chart, and it hadn't been there before. He didn't tell anyone. He simply checked his gauges, secured his tank, and descended. The descent felt longer this time. The light faded faster. His mind filled with memories that weren't memories. The slow exhale, the soundless weight of the deep, the illusion of stillness that wasn't still at all. He reached the seabed, guided by his light, and turned toward the wreck. It was different, not destroyed, not disturbed, just changed. Parts of the hull seemed cleaner, stripped of corrosion. The sand had shifted, revealing shapes that hadn't been visible before. One of them was circular, as if something enormous had pressed into the sediment and left a perfect impression. The diver's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He aimed his light toward the starboard side, expecting to see the breathing rock again. But it wasn't there. The area was empty, only the disturbed seabed and the ghostly remains of steel. Then he noticed the absence of something else. The ambient sounds of the deep, the faint creak of metal, the drift of water, had vanished. The silence was absolute, suffocating. Something brushed against the back of his fin. He spun, light slicing through the dark. Nothing. Only particles of silt swirling lazily in the beam. He turned again. Still nothing. But his instruments were reacting. The pressure gauge fluctuated. The compass spun wildly, and the water itself felt heavier, thicker, as if charged with unseen movement. He realized then that it wasn't gone. It had moved. Somewhere in the dark, beyond the edge of his light, the breathing began again. It was slower this time, deeper, more deliberate, as though the creature knew he had returned. The sound wasn't audible in the traditional sense. It was felt, like vibrations through bone. The sand trembled slightly with each exhale. He froze, light fixed on the empty seabed. The sound drew closer. A shadow appeared at the limit of visibility, immense and shapeless. The diver tried to steady his breath, but panic had already taken root. His instincts screamed to ascend, to leave, to flee from the abyss. But curiosity anchored him in place. The shadow grew until it filled the light completely. Then something reflected the beam, not eyes, but a faint, slick surface, moving in perfect rhythm with that impossible breath. The diver lifted his camera, hand shaking, and captured a few seconds before the equipment glitched, the image warping into static. He rose, too fast, barely remembering the safety stops. When he surfaced, the crew rushed to help, thinking he'd run out of air. His first words were a whisper. "It's awake." They didn't understand, but they could see the terror in his eyes. The footage was sent to the research team for analysis, but every frame showing the shadow was corrupted. The audio, though, survived. Faint, distorted, but real. It contained a sound like pressure being released, a sound that could only be described as breathing. The file was labeled Unidentified Submarine Biological Entity and stored under restricted access. In the weeks that followed, oceanographers debated whether it was a recording anomaly, a natural venting system, or something new entirely. None of their theories fit the data. The sound repeated at intervals that mimicked living respiration, too regular to be geological, too slow to be mechanical. Meanwhile, fishermen near that stretch of ocean began reporting strange occurrences. Dead fish surfacing overnight, sonar interference, and deep, resonant noises that vibrated through their hulls. The Coast Guard dismissed it as deep-sea tremors, but the pattern spread, moving outward in concentric circles from the original coordinates. It wasn't confined anymore. Something beneath the wreck had shifted, stirring currents that hadn't moved in centuries. And if you've been holding your breath during this dive into the dark, now might be a good time to like this video. Not just to steady yourself, but to help others discover what waits beneath the waves. Months later, an oceanographic research vessel passing through the same region lost power for 27 minutes. When systems came back online, sonar captured a single pulse, strong enough to register hundreds of meters below. The data resembled a heartbeat. The ocean remembers everything, and sometimes it breathes back. If you're still here, you should subscribe. Because the next part of this story drags us deeper than any diver has ever dared to go. The ocean does not forget. It waits. By 1998, the region where the divers had encountered the living rock had become an area of quiet fascination for researchers and conspiracy theorists alike. It was unofficially known among marine scientists as Sector 9, a stretch of ocean deeper than most maps recorded, where compasses misbehaved and machines faltered. Most dismissed the stories, until the anomalies grew too precise to ignore. At first it was small things, instruments that failed the moment they entered the region, pressure readings that contradicted known data, sonar images returning voids, black gaps where the seafloor should have been visible. These weren't errors, they were absences. Something massive occupied that space, but it reflected no signal, as if it absorbed technology itself. A private research vessel named the Horizon Deep was the next to venture there. It wasn't a government ship, but one funded quietly by a corporation with roots in deep-sea mining. Officially, their mission was geological exploration. Unofficially, their directive was to investigate the footage, the breathing formation, and confirm whether it could be exploited, studied, or contained. The team consisted of scientists, engineers, and one former diver, the same man who had seen the creature up close. He hadn't wanted to return, but he was offered a sum that made refusal difficult. More than that, though, he was drawn back by something deeper than fear, a need for closure, or understanding, or maybe the impossible desire to see it again. The descent was recorded from multiple angles this time, each camera secured in titanium casings. Redundant systems ensured data wouldn't corrupt. Every precaution was taken, every variable accounted for. But the ocean doesn't care for preparation. It only gives what it chooses to give. As they descended, light faded as usual, replaced by the soft blue of depth. But around 2,000 meters, the blue vanished entirely. The darkness wasn't natural. It was total. Sonar showed no floor, only empty space. The pilot slowed, adjusting thrusters, and the submersible drifted through the void. Then came the pulse. At first it was faint, a vibration through the hull, subtle, like a deep heartbeat. The pilot frowned, checking instruments, but they all flickered simultaneously, then reset. The lights dimmed, then stabilized again. Everyone aboard felt it, the sensation of something vast moving just beyond sight. The diver pressed his hand against the viewport. Nothing but black water stared back. And yet within that blackness he felt a presence. Watching, waiting. The pulse returned, stronger. The sonar emitted a single echo, a wall of density rising from below. The submersible's depth gauge stuttered wildly, readings climbing and falling, as though the sea itself was breathing around them. The scientist at the console whispered that it wasn't possible, that nothing that size could exist in these waters. But the diver already knew better. He leaned toward the glass, voice trembling. It's the same one. The hull shuddered. The entire vessel groaned, metal flexing like bone under immense pressure. The temperature dropped sharply, fogging the interior glass. Then, through the mist, something appeared. Not a clear shape, but movement, circular and deliberate, as though the water itself were revolving around them. They weren't looking at the creature anymore. They were inside it. The lights flickered again. For a fraction of a second, an outline appeared beyond the viewport, immense, translucent, textured like old flesh wrapped in shadows. It filled every direction, no beginning, no end. The submersible's external cameras froze, recording only static and the faint rhythmic sound of deep inhalation. Every living thing aboard felt it at once. The air growing heavy, the lungs tightening as if mimicking the creature's breathing. The diver gasped through his regulator, his pulse sinking to the same impossible rhythm. When it exhaled, the water outside seemed to move, not outward, but through them. The sensation was like being submerged in something alive, something ancient. The captain yelled to ascend, but the controls refused to respond. Depth gauges spun. Lights dimmed again. Then the comms filled with a low hum, mechanical yet organic, a resonance that vibrated in their skulls. It wasn't sound. It was thought. The diver clutched his head. Images flickered through his mind. Not words, not memories, but impressions. Mountains beneath the ocean. Fire turned to silence. The slow birth of continents. The creature wasn't from below. It was before below, older than the ocean itself. The hum faded. The submersible rose without command, carried by unseen currents. Instruments blinked back to life, one by one. When they finally breached the surface, the crew erupted into chaos. gasping, shouting, shaking. Only the diver remained silent, staring at the water. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from something else. Recognition. The sea had shown him something it wasn't supposed to. Back on land, the footage was recovered but heavily corrupted. Only fragments survived. The pulse, sound, deep and slow. A single frame showing what looked like part of an enormous rib structure. And the diver's face, eyes wide, whispering a phrase before the feed cut out. It's not sleeping, it's remembering. The corporation shut down the project days later, citing safety risks. The data was classified, the coordinates erased, and the Horizon Deep disappeared 6 months later during another mission, with no debris ever recovered. But the ocean floor changed again. Sonar readings began showing movement in a 50-kilometer radius around the wreck. Currents shifted, temperatures dropped. Something was stirring. If this story has you glancing at the dark water a little differently, maybe it's time to subscribe. Not for comfort, but to stay close as we descend further into the abyss together. The ocean is older than memory, and yet it remembers everything. Long after the incident with the Horizon Deep, rumors continued to spread. Faint, fractured accounts that passed between sailors and researchers like fragments of a curse. No official report ever surfaced, but among those who worked near Sector 9, there was an unspoken understanding. The sea had changed. By 1999, the currents in that part of the Atlantic began to behave unnaturally. Satellite data showed shifting pressure zones, enormous cold spots, and inexplicable distortions in temperature that radiated outward like ripples from an unseen source. Submarines passing through reported sudden loss of power, strange acoustic interference, and on more than one occasion, the sense of something vast moving silently beneath them. The diver who had returned twice to that place, the only survivor of the Horizon Deep, was living alone by then. He had retired from diving, retreated inland, and refused every interview request. He spent his days near a small lake, avoiding the ocean entirely, but he still heard it at night. The pulse, faint but steady, echoing behind his ribs, as though the deep had marked him, claimed him, and carried a piece of its rhythm inside his chest. Then, in early 2000, he received a letter. No return address, no signature, only coordinates and a single sentence written in careful, deliberate handwriting. It's rising. He knew where those coordinates led. The same region, the same depth, the same silence. Against every instinct he had, he went back. He told himself it was to put an end to it, to see for himself that nothing remained. But deep down he knew he was answering a call that had never truly stopped. The research vessel this time was smaller, privately chartered by a journalist investigating missing ships. She had heard whispers of the Horizon Deep, of the divers' recordings, of the corporation that erased its own data. When the diver agreed to come, she knew the story would either end her career or make her name immortal. Neither of them understood what they were walking or sinking into. They reached the site under gray skies. The water was unnaturally calm, like glass stretched too thin. Instruments malfunctioned almost immediately. Compasses spun, depth sensors blinked out. Still they prepared the submersible, a compact two-person craft built for silent descent. When they submerged, the surface world vanished quickly, swallowed by layers of colorless light, until even the memory of the sky felt distant. The descent felt slower this time, almost reluctant, as if the ocean were holding them back. At 3,200 meters, Visibility dropped to 0. They turned off the lights, letting darkness swallow them completely. Only then did something faintly luminescent emerge below. A slow, undulating glow, deep blue and irregular, pulsing like veins of light through stone. The journalist leaned forward, whispering that it looked beautiful. The diver said nothing. He knew beauty in the deep was only camouflage. The glow spread outward, revealing fragments of the wreck, twisted metal half buried in sediment, but now they were surrounded by something else. Something massive. The rock they had once seen was gone. In its place was a sprawling structure, organic, yet architectural, a network of ridges and hollows that pulsed in slow, deliberate rhythm. "It's not one creature," the diver murmured. "It's many, or one that never ends." The journalist recorded everything, her voice trembling as she narrated what she saw. The structure wasn't inert. It was moving, expanding, contracting, almost breathing. But there was something else within it, faint outlines inside the glowing mass, shapes that looked disturbingly familiar. Hulls of ships, fragments of submarines, metal fused seamlessly into living tissue. The sea hadn't devoured those wrecks. It had absorbed them. The radio crackled with static. Through the noise came a low, resonant tone, slow and deep, the same pulse, but this time it wasn't distant. It was right beneath them. The submersible began to drift downward, uncommanded. The controls locked. Pressure alarms flashed. The diver tried to override the system, but every switch he touched responded as though it were part of something alive. The craft itself felt tethered, drawn downward by unseen force. Then the lights outside flickered. The glow intensified, coalescing into patterns, like veins under translucent skin. A shape rose slowly from the structure, a vast segment of the creature's surface, lifting like a lung, expanding. It wasn't a single body, but an immense continuum of living matter stretching into the abyss. The diver realized the terrifying truth. What they had taken for seafloor was only a fraction of it. The creature's body spanned kilometers, maybe more. The journalist whispered, "It's the ocean itself." Her voice broke on the last word as the pulse returned, deeper than before. The submersible shook violently, and for a moment they both felt a pressure, not physical, but mental. Images flooded their minds again, volcanic fire cooling into oceans, lightning over primeval seas, life crawling from the depths to breathe air for the first time. The creature was older than land, older than the stars' reflection on water. It wasn't just alive, it was memory. The living memory of the planet itself. The diver screamed through the comms, demanding ascent. The system didn't respond. Instead, the glow beneath them began to rise. The ocean moved like lungs filling with breath. And then, for the first time in history, the sea exhaled. The force sent waves of current spiraling upward. The surface miles above buckled. The submersible was thrown backward, tumbling through clouds of silt and debris. The cameras recorded only fragments, flashes of light, metallic groans, the faint suggestion of eyes opening in the dark. When they finally stabilized, everything was still again. The glow had vanished. The pulse was gone. The diver's instruments flickered back to life. But the depth gauge no longer read 3,200 meters. It read 2,100. The seabed had risen by more than a kilometer. They ascended in silence. The journalist sat motionless, eyes wide, recording nothing, speaking nothing. The diver watched the depth readout climb, wondering if the ocean would allow them to leave this time. When they broke the surface, the world above seemed changed. The water churned in slow, unnatural spirals, as if stirred from below. The sky was darker, though it was midday. Birds circled high overhead but never descended. On shore, seismographs registered faint tremors emanating from the Atlantic basin, too deep for tectonic activity, too regular for coincidence. Within a month, those tremors had synchronized into a pattern, a rhythm measured in perfect intervals, like a heartbeat. Scientists argued endlessly. Some claimed it was volcanic venting, others said undersea landslides. None could explain the biological residue later found drifting in samples collected from the area, complex organic compounds that matched no known species. The diver never spoke publicly again. The journalist's footage was confiscated before it could air, though fragments leaked online. A half-minute of darkness punctuated by the sound of slow, deliberate breathing. In coastal towns nearby, fishermen began reporting strange tides. The sea would recede farther than usual, then return violently, as though drawing breath. Nets surfaced, shredded, fish vanished, and sonar buoys recorded pulses of energy that followed a near-human rhythm. The last time the diver was seen, he was standing at the edge of that same inland lake, staring at his reflection. He looked calm, peaceful even, but those who approached him said they could hear something faint when they stood nearby. A low, rhythmic vibration, deep in his chest, perfectly timed with the waves lapping at the shore. A few weeks later, the lake itself began to rise and fall, slowly, regularly, like the sea had found him again. The oceans cover 70% of Earth's surface. We call them lifeless depths, but maybe that's arrogance. Maybe what we think of as silence is simply patience. Maybe the planet is alive in ways we cannot yet comprehend, breathing slowly, dreaming beneath the weight of its own creation. And every so often, it exhales. If you've reached this far into the deep, if you've felt the cold weight of the water pressing against your lungs, take a moment, like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment telling us what you think the divers found. Because one day soon, when the sea breathes again, we may all have to decide whether we're part of its dream or part of its memory.